All right, so I want to talk about this sled that I made. I made a video about this, and then I got a lot of comments about it that were both positive and negative, but I wanted to make sure people heard some things that I didn't see stated in some of the comments, and so that people get a whole picture of what's going on with this thing. So people were very concerned about the safety of the sled and also the way the accuracy turned out. So I'm going to talk about those two things in this video. So about safety, now you need to know that I am definitely very concerned about safety in the shop and everything I do actually. I've been woodworking for about 30 years and had this table saw about 10 years. And you can see I've got all my 10 fingers, I got both of my eyes, and I intend to always have those things. So when I work in the shop, I think about safety. There's no doubt about that. That said, so this sled brought up a lot of comments about concerns that it was not safe the way I've got it set up, that I need hold-down clamps for my piece that I'm cutting, because otherwise this thing could kick back on me and throw the piece back at me and hit my face or some other part of my body. So let's talk about that. So what I'm going to do first is take the sled off and talk about the way people use table saws in general, right? So rip cutting, right? So if I use my rip fence here, this is an aftermarket rip fence, but it's the same idea no matter what kind of rip fence you got. So when you're using the rip fence, you're going to push your piece of wood through, right? And you are trying to push the wood between the blade and the fence. And you're trying to cut the piece, and then after it goes past the blade, it now has to keep going all the way through and then exit on the other side. Well, when you're doing that, you're wedging that piece of wood in between those two surfaces, and that is a potential for a kickback situation, right? So that's when you have to push this piece of wood through, because if you don't, it's going to come right back at you, right? So you do have to push forward. Now you don't have to push down. You do push, you know, you might use a push stick or something like that, but you know, we're not talking about hold-down clamps in this situation. But that's what people use. That's how people cut rip cuts every day, right? All right, next situation is a miter gauge, right? So I've got this nice aftermarket miter gauge here. So put this in this slot here. And first thing I notice since we're talking about it is there's no hold downs on this thing, right? It didn't come with hold down clamps. It doesn't really have a way to add hold down clamps. So this is the way they sell this thing, and it's, you know, they expect you to use it like that. So for some reason, they decided that hold-down clamps were not necessary. And this miter gauge is a lot like, conceptually, is like the sled that I made, right? Just the sled has the table, and it covers the whole surface of the table saw, not just the one side. But anyway, so when you're using this tool, you're pushing that piece through, and yeah, you could hold your piece down, and you probably should, I guess, but they didn't design it to where you've got a clamp that'll help you to hold that piece down. So apparently these devices are okay without clamps. All right. So come back to my sled here. Okay, so what was said about the sled is that you know, I've got the piece here, and there's nothing to hold it down, so it's going to come back at me, right, when I'm pushing it through. The fact is, when you cut with this sled, the blade, as long as it's higher than the piece you're cutting, so if I got a 3/4 inch board, as long as that blade is a little bit above that piece of board, it is going to cut down. It's going to come down into the wood, and it's going to help to push it down into the table and against the fence. Now I know some people said that's not true. It's not going. That doesn't work that way. It does. And the other thing is the weight. The weight of the piece is really, that's all you really need between the weight of the piece and that blade. I don't know if that's a good piece, but you get the idea. So the weight of this piece, which is not that much, but that's really all it needs in order to hold it down and then the blade coming into it. So, and I did some tests on this. So I tried it with some smaller pieces of wood, like some narrow pieces. And yeah, narrow pieces are a little bit, they want to jiggle around because there's not much to them. And so, yeah, you might want to hold those down to kind of keep them from moving around. But really, I designed this, I want to use this for some panels, some kind of medium-sized panels. So for that kind of thing, these pieces are going to be heavy enough to hold themselves down. Now, you might say, why don't you just go ahead and put the hold downs on there just to be safe? Yeah, you know what, I could. But you can see the design of this sled is to be sleek, right? Nice and low profile. This fence is just tall enough to support a 3/4 inch board. I can go a little thicker if I want to and go to 1 inch. I did a test. I made some laminated pieces over there. I just laminated a couple of scraps. So I got 1.5 inch thickness there. So I could do, so now, and you can feel the weight just starts to get where that thing is not going, that is not going to fly up, okay? And so some people said that if okay, even if it's true that the blade will tend to cut down and push the wood down, once you get past the rotational axis of the blade, now the blade is on the way up, right? And it's trying to push the wood up, right? Well, it's kind of true, but the thing is, since the wood is free, there's no fence. Over here you got the rip fence when you're doing a rip cut, but when you're doing this kind of cut, the wood goes through that blade, and once it's cut, it's free to go away from the blade. It doesn't have anything pushing it towards the blade. So really not much reason for the wood to grab onto the blade. So very unlikely that you're going to have the blade, doing that, kicking the wood back because it's so close to the blade. So I really don't think that's a real issue there. I know that was stated that it was, but so anyway, okay. Hopefully I kind of made a little point there. I'm not trying to convince you that I'm right, but I think I'm pretty safe with this thing, and I'm going to continue using it the way I showed you in the previous video, and I think I'm still pretty safe using it. So, all right. The other thing we want to talk about is accuracy. So, in the other video, when I first showed you this sled, I found that I had about a 33 thousandths out of square on over a 15-inch dimension on the piece that I was cutting. And I said I was okay with that. I like that. Sure, I would like it more accurate, but that's what I got. And so a lot of people said, well, that's terrible accuracy. Well, actually, if you want to go back and calculate the angle that equals, it's actually 1/8 of a degree. So 1/8 of a degree is not very much. So so that's one thing to consider, to put that into perspective. And then I know people mention about the 5-cut method, which I know about, and I think that's a great method. And I think it's actually more accurate than a lot of people need, but it's great. It's a nice thing to do to get your accuracy. Now, my fence, as you saw, was glued down, right? So I couldn't do any adjustments to it. Once I got it in position, it's stuck. That's where it's going. So I can't do the 5-cut method because it won't allow me to adjust it, right? And you might say, why didn't you screw it down so you could do that? Well, I prefer glue. That's all. I like to glue things together. I think that gives you a lot of rigidity and solid construction that I'm not saying it's better than screws, but it's just my preference. So that's what I got. Now, there was something else though. Somebody said something about how maybe I didn't take a cut on that piece initially on the right side, and then when I cut it to test it, I didn't really compare it fairly to itself because I only did one cut, and then the other edge was assumed to be good from the factory. So it actually turned out to be true. That was true. So I did another test here. So this piece, I'm going to cut it again, and I'm going to show you. I'm not going to use a hold down again. I hope you don't get I hope you don't cringe too badly on this, but I'm going to try it like this. So I'm going to take a cut on both sides. So take a cut on this side. And then I'm going to rotate it this way, so keep the same edge against the fence. You can see I've been drilling into this piece. And we're going to take another cut on this side. All right. And then take my caliper and measure it. So let's see what we got. Okay, 4.855 and 4.853. So 2 thousandths. Square within 2 thousandths. Wow. That. Okay, have I convinced you? I got a square sled. All right, so I misled you on that last video. It was actually much better than I thought it was. So, all right, so there you go. Now, on that point, though, I did notice something that it did not affect the accuracy of what I did here, but what I noticed is that the fence, so I put the straight edge across here as I was checking it out, and I noticed that the fence actually was not straight from this side all the way across. There's a little gap here. And what I realized, I think, is that when I notched this out here before I installed it, that caused this fence to get out of, it wasn't straight anymore. And then I just glued it down. So now there's a gap over here. So if I ever do want to use this side of the fence, I'm going to have a problem over here. So since it's glued down, I can't do anything, right? Well, what I can do is I made a piece of wood shim here, and all I did is I wedged it in here, and I'm just going to glue it in place there. And then I got some index card material, and I'm going to just put that over here and just kind of fill in the space here that's a little bit out of square. And I think that's going to fix that right up, and I'll be good to go. So there you go. So that's all I want to say, except for thanks a lot for all the comments. I appreciate all your comments, even the ones that are negative. Keep them coming.